Disclaimer: this show is not for the faint of heart or the easily offended. The views expressed here are that of the show hosts only, and not their wives, girlfriends, husbands, boyfriends, polygamous partners, employers, music artists, businesses, or anyone other than the Cognitive Dissolutions podcasters. The explicit tag is there for a good reason. Please proceed with caution.
Every one of us will have to decide whether or not we want to keep this great republic or whether we're willing to sacrifice it and surrender it to tyranny.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Cognitive Dissolutions podcast, where we address the current issues of today with brash humor, skepticism, or aggression to invoke critical thinking in the masses. We take our tightly held beliefs, everyone's tightly held beliefs, mash them up with current events, politics, and religion, then throw them to the fires of skepticism. We magnify the so-called logic, then blow it all up. There is no green zone of safety for a lack of critical thinking. This is episode number 17. Your hosts today are Joel, John, and I'm Al, and we are your tormentors. John, Joel, how are you today?
Joel, you first, man. I always go first.
I know. It worked for me, but I was doing fine until John made me go first. Well,
make your day, buddy.
I'm doing pretty good. I learned a valuable lesson today already, and that is that guitar players don't know shit about making videos.
I could have told you that.
Yeah.
That's why they hire videographers.
We don't have any money. We're guitar players.
No, you're not supposed to have money. See, you're an artist. Artists are supposed to starve.
Oh. I'm not starving.
That's how they become inspired.
Oh. Well, that's why I'm just mediocre then, because I'm kind of round.
Starving Marvin.
Well.
Hey, I'm in shape. Round's a shape.
Round is, in fact, a shape.
This is true.
So, John, how are you?
So,
I'm okay.
Well, I'm convinced. How about you, Al?
I'm okay.
not really.
I could use some help. Are you guys willing to help? Are you
Yes.
beer?
Yeah.
Are you beer?
I'm not beer, no.
Then you can't help.
Although I did buy a beer for a guy in Applebee's tonight.
Well, that's very nice of you. It wasn't me,
Well, no. As we were walking in, the guy and his lady friend were ahead of us, and he's got, Airborne Infantry T-shirt on the back, and, he's got his veteran's ball cap on. And he was talking about how he had just come from a wake or something, and his family, because a buddy of his died overseas, so she was taking him out to drinks afterwards. So I was like, fuck it. I thought about it as I saw him sit down, so I pulled the waitress over. I was like, hey, buy this guy a beer for me. Gave her $10. And I told her, I go, don't tell him it's from me. Just tell him there's money on a tab for him to buy a beer, and sorry for his loss. And she went and fucking told the guy, which was kind of frustrating, but whatever. So anyway,
you didn't tip her. What a bitch.
God, it makes me sound like such an asshole, doesn't it?
Kind of does, yeah.
Yeah, well, fuck you.
There you go.
That's sweet. Yeah.
No, that's cool. Al giveth and Al taketh away.
Jesus.
Al's a dick.
He did come over and thank me afterwards, and but I didn't do it because of that. I felt for the guy.
Yeah, it's hard not to. I mean, damn.
Well, sad news in the music industry this week. Kanye West was found alive in his apartment earlier today.
Yeah, it was rather depressing when I heard about Prince dying, and then this fucker's still alive. That hit me pretty hard.
I think it's fairly certain the world is in mourning in both regards.
Yeah.
Although I would swear that there was purple rain today. I would swear it.
You know, I had a situation where it was one of those where there was a rain cloud, but just right behind it just opened up the sun, and the sun was just blaring through the rain, and it had some colored hues that I certainly wouldn't mind calling purple on some level.
That's kind of what I'm talking about. I saw something similar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Joel, did you experience the thunderstorm the other day?
I did not, but that's not to say it didn't happen. I do have a lot of white noise around my house because of my wicked tinnitus, so
gotcha.
Unless it was right over my house, I wouldn't have heard it.
John, I don't think it reached all the way up to you, did it?
No.
Oh, yeah, only in my little neighborhood. It was so percussive, it fucking shook our house.
I love that.
I mean, lightning was, oh God, yeah, it was great. No rain yet, and it just, all of a sudden you hear this crack and shake into the house. And, you know, my daughter jumps, you know, squealing. She thought it was great. She was entertained as all hell.
Yeah.
You know, so I love thunderstorms.
My friend told me this story one time that they had this wicked thunderstorm right over their house, and it was so bad that a piece of bread that was sitting on top of the microwave fell off into the toaster. It closed the toaster popped up, fucking Jesus was on the toast.
God, I knew that was coming.
That story may or may not be true.
May or may not be true?
That's a factual statement.
Well, it is factual that you made the statement.
I factually made a statement.
Well,
I didn't make a factual statement.
Let's think about this way. So, say a deity does exist, and say it is the Christian deity and Jesus, and his best way of communicating is through a picture of possibly himself on toast. I'd say that's a pretty fucking retarded deity right there. That's like the children's magician, you know, clown at the fucking birthday parties.
Is that any more ridiculous? I mean, really any more ridiculous than a cracker turning into his body and wine turning into his blood in your tummy?
No.
Doesn't seem so.
No, it's pretty fucking retarded all the way.
Even John can get behind that. I've gotten in trouble for saying such things, but yeah, I'll reserve comment on such things. Yes.
Wait, how do you get in trouble for saying such things? I'm curious. How does that work?
When everybody in a room, if there's 30 people in a room and all but one believes in transubstantiation and you disagree with it, you end up being the minority. And when you're the minority, you get stepped on pretty well. That's democracy. That's how that works.
That's probably true.
Well, that's a bummer.
Shit happens, you know. And let's face it, tradition is tradition. When people believe that, you know, you eat a wafer and you drink some wine and they become, you know, sacrificed flesh in their bellies, especially when they're vegans, that's kind of weird, but, you know.
Yeah, and a little morbid when you actually think about it. Essentially, you're being a cannibal at that point.
No, you're taking the deity into you. You know, could we possibly get any more primitive about these things? But yeah, you know, it is what it is.
Well, that explains why the priests want everybody on their knees in front of them, I guess.
Oh dear God, you had to go there, didn't you?
Well, you know, he goes right before.
I don't know if you should. I don't know if you should do this, Al. I don't know.
Jesus walks along and goes, "Take this cracker, it's of my body. Take this wine, it's of my blood. Take this," and Judas goes, whoa, stop with the mayonnaise.
God. It's just, you think it's going to get better.
He went there.
You think there's a chance.
Yeah, he went there.
Now me thinking that Rome, Italy is in the UK is not so bad anymore, is it?
No. Rome is not in England. No. No. However, and what he's referring to is I found an article about a Roman villa, a house, a home, a rather wealthy-looking one, that was discovered in England, and it is being dated to the 600s AD, which places it 200 years later than the Roman departure from England. This will be overturning some history books and kind of changing how we look at British history. You know, the whole idea of King Arthur being a Roman isn't so fantastic anymore. It seems a little more believable after this discovery, but you know, it is what it is. I thought it was very interesting, but
I think it will be once I read into this more. And I mean, just a theme that pops into my mind is that I can't help but wonder how much, not only of history do we just have wrong because we don't know, there really isn't any evidence, but just the sheer volume, and I would say a good majority of the history we think we know is just flat out whitewashed BS, you know?
well, I don't know that I would say whitewashed BS so much as I would say, legend. Look at it this way. I mean, I've raised this in the podcast before. Let me describe it to you again. We look at George Washington. We tell stories about the cherry tree. That George Washington chopped down the cherry tree. Father, I cannot tell a lie. I did it. Okay, right? You know the story.
Yeah, certainly, yeah.
Never happened. There is absolutely nothing
Sure.
in George Washington's history to suggest that happened. So we don't know that it didn't happen, but we do know who invented the story. It was a guy in the early 1800s. So here we've got a legend that we tell all of our children. We know who wrote it down, and we know that this guy claims to have invented the story, or at least his grandchildren claim that he claimed to them that he invented the story. So we know that this is a fictitious tale, but we tell it to our children because it tells a moral story. Don't tell a lie. See, George Washington didn't tell a lie. You don't need to tell a lie. So we teach it to our kids, and then they think it's true. Well, 1,000 years later, after all the historians are dead and that guy's memoirs are no longer around, that guy's grandkid's story is no longer around, but the legend is still there, all of a sudden people think it's true.
Yeah.
That's kind of what happened with British history as well. You look at something like King Arthur, maybe this guy actually existed. Maybe this guy was a real leader who, actually opposed the Saxons, like the movie, what was that movie, Arthur? I think it was. I think it was.
Oh,
anyway.
Well, something like that with what's her name? My wife.
The
my
girl
wife
from
loves her.
the girl from Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Keira Knightley, that was her.
Thank you.
She was in that. Decent movie, good movie, decent cinematography, good storyline, good plot. But historians looked at it and said, probably didn't happen. Well, you know what? Maybe it actually did. This new discovery might be somebody placing their value on that discovery, but the dating looks pretty not bad, and the dating looks relatively accurate. So I'm willing to suggest that maybe somebody who had Roman culture actually did still live in England 200 years after Rome left England. Well, what does that say about English history? That means throughout the Saxon invasions and at the beginning of the Norman invasions, there were still people living in England who had Roman culture, who had Roman technology, who had, Roman values maybe even. It wasn't a barbaric culture when the Normans arrived. Maybe, things were a little different than they are. It would certainly explain a whole lot, like the technology level of the defenders when Harold and William attacked England. It certainly seemed like they put up a pretty good defense. It certainly seemed like they had a lot of wealth, and that was why William and Harold wanted to go there and take everything to begin with. There were a lot of mysteries in history that are really solved by this discovery if we just if we can figure out how to put it in the right context without fucking it up.
Well, there's that hypothesis, but and like I brought up this point with you, I think, was how do we know that there weren't a couple of Masons that were contracted to do a similar thing several hundred years later because somebody went, hey, I like that design. I like this kind of viewpoint, this kind of architecture. Build me this on this property. And they happen to know how to do it or had the money to import Roman architects to do the work. Doesn't mean that the Romans were still there.
That would be
Just the architecture.
Let me suggest this. I mean, whenever you have a mass migration and or some peoples that go in and take over another land, even if they're later ejected for some reason, you can't really, it's not reasonable to think that everyone is going to leave. You're going to have all sorts of different just personal dynamics of maybe people intermingling and hooking up and all that stuff. And so I don't think it's reasonable to think that, there was Romans and then there weren't. There surely was some crossover just culturally that was happening.
Well, Al, to address your idea, emulation is a distinct possibility. However, the dating of things like carbon and charcoal, stuff like that from a fireplace, and things of that nature have placed the ruin in the 600s-ish AD. So, I mean, it is possible that it's an emulation, but it's not actually very likely when you put the dating up to it. Artifacts also kind of suggest that it's much, much older than that. It is a distinct possibility, though. And yeah, I mean, it is very likely. It's very easily suggested that a lot of Romans probably did stick around after Rome abandoned the British Isles, especially the wealthy ones, the kind that would have a villa like this. The subsequent invasions and the stories written by people like Bede are the ones that are suggesting to the usual paradigm that those people either didn't stick around or they were very quickly killed off. The Saxons did a pretty good job of fucking up middle and southern England. And when Harold and William showed up in 1066, they fucked everything up. They basically they raped, pillaged, murdered, took everything they could, and decided to keep it, to include land. Of course, this is a 400-year gap between the time when this villa would have been destroyed or abandoned and somebody like Harold and William. I'm referring, of course, to William the Conqueror, the point at which English history really begins.
Really, he is otherwise known as Billy the Badass.
Billy the Badass, yeah, exactly. And actually, Billy Badass is a reference to Billy the Kid, but anyway, Billy is named after William the Conqueror, as everyone, William Wallace and all the other Williams in British history. But it changes the narrative to think that 200 years of British history was either forgotten or lost, and now it's found again. And now we got to figure out what to do with that discovery. And this is the problem with history. Is you really can't say that anything is etched in stone unless it actually is. And even when it is, you may be translating that thing through your own lens rather than through the lens of the guy who carved it.
Well, you certainly are. Certainly are.
So everything
is unavoidable.
The whole topic is subjective. And this is why I despise historians who speak in absolute terms. Archaeologists understand this. They understand that you can't write history in absolute terms. You can't write a textbook and say Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. Bullshit. That's a false statement. 100% of that statement is false. First of all, Christopher Columbus wasn't the one that discovered it. According to every one of the logbooks we still have in our possession, most of them are in Spain, but anyway, all of them suggest that a lookout found it. the captain, the admiral, did not find this island. He didn't make the discovery. Of course, he was in command, but the guy who was up on the roost was the guy that discovered it, and he didn't discover America either. He discovered an island in the Mediterranean, or in the Caribbean. He wasn't a discoverer. He was a capitalist, and he didn't discover it in 1492. The discovery was made in 1493. It was a 9-month journey, and the year had already elapsed by the time he was ready to quit, turn around, and go home before somebody found it. Anyway, yeah, long story short, history textbooks are awful.
Yeah, so...
Especially if they're written in Texas.
yeah.
Talk about whitewash.
They tell a narrative, and this is, and the book that I suggested you guys read, Lies My Teacher Told Me, is just full of this stuff. That book is an indictment of history textbooks that we, stuff that we teach our kids. And we don't teach history. I don't know a single history teacher who teaches history. We teach a narrative. We teach a history. We teach what we're told to teach, really. And usually the ones who break the mold and try to, throw some facts in there that break the narrative are usually the ones that get fired real quick.
Not even just throw some facts in there, even if they throw some questions in there.
Yeah, exactly. History is not full of defined events. History is full of controversies. The American Revolution is a perfect example. We paint in our high schools and junior high schools, we paint the American Revolution as a foregone conclusion. We teach it to our kids as if it has already happened and we knew what the outcome was going to be from the start. That's the manner in which we teach it. Of course, a smart kid is going to sit back and say, whoa, now wait a minute.
Well, and it depends on which part of the country you're learning it. I mean, if you're in Southeast America, you're going to learn a different version of that history.
Well, one thing to think about is maybe this notion that history is defined as an explanation of what's happened is just a wrong definition, because clearly there were events that happened that if we could know, that's how they happened. I don't think you can object to that. Obviously, there's an objective truth of what actually happened during whatever given time that you're talking about. But
you're never, with history, you're not going to get an objective viewpoint.
No, you're not, and that's what I'm saying.
The information age.
That fundamental understanding of the definition of history, that it's not this, that what you're learning is simply not what you think you're learning. As far as history is not, as John was saying, set in stone because of all of the lenses through which it's viewed and retold and so on and so forth. Now, that's not to say there weren't things that happened the way they happened and for the reasons that they happened. It's just that it's no longer knowable because it's kind of like that game Telephone that you used to play in grade school, where the message would get so jumbled up at the end that no one even recognized. It was completely unrecognizable from what the original message was.
Well, and see, my argument to that would be that it actually is knowable, at least some of it. The archaeology is there. You just have to look for it. And
I'm talking on a really comprehensive level, though.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you guys this: given the fact that most of history is, I don't want to use the word whitewashed, but framed. I'll use the word framed. Most of world history is framed behind the lens that the person who wrote it down had. Is it okay for us to do the same thing? Because we do it. We do it for very good reasons. We do it to teach morality, we do it to teach ethics, and we do it to inspire nationalism. So are these reasons...
But we don't sell it in that kind of box. That's not how it's... in that kind of packaging. That's not how it's sold. It's not sold as this is a version of what we think happened and we're telling you this way because we want you to learn a lesson. It's sold as, like you say, and are complaining about, as an absolute truth. So it'd be cool if we were more honest about that.
Can you really do that with children, though?
Be more honest? I think so. I think so.
I totally think you can be. You know, I try to take that approach with my kids as giving them an opportunity to analyze how a situation plays out, what the consequences of those actions are, and how it would feel to them if these things were done to them in that way. To allow them
frame things analytically,
as opposed to saying, this is how you should act, this is how you should feel, this is how things should happen. I go, should this occur this way?
Okay, so what about strategic omissions? For example, we wouldn't tell elementary school kids that Jefferson owned slaves. We wouldn't tell an elementary school kid that Washington owned slaves. But we might tell a high school kid that, just to bring up the topic of controversy and to try and get their wheels rolling about, conflict resolution and things of that nature.
I think you change focuses. I think you can definitely change focuses on what you're talking about to be more age appropriate, and not age appropriate in a moralistic way, but age appropriate insofar as that one thing builds on the other, so that you're able to retain more things. You start off with a really basic framework and then build on top of that. So omitting in that context doesn't bother me.
Okay. Al?
I'm still thinking about it, because the example you gave of like Jefferson and Washington, when my kids were 6 and 7, they were already learning about slavery in school.
But were they taught that these two characters, just as an example, were complicit in this awful, awful enterprise?
I told them.
Well, yeah, I don't. The thing is, and I'm definitely not speaking in far-reaching terms here, but just thinking back to when I was a kid, I can't recall when I fully grasped the concept of what slavery really was. You hear the word, and it just doesn't have that much of an impact initially. You don't understand what it could possibly be like to literally have no control over the decisions the result of your life, I guess. So you do have to build up to that, because you can tell a kid that Jefferson owned slaves, and slaves are people that he owned, however you want to frame that up, but it takes so much more context, so much more life experience to know the value of what that means.
Well, I disagree. Ask any 7th grader. And Al, you can chime in at any time.
Not necessarily talking about 7th graders. I mean, talking about earlier on. And
well, earlier on maybe, but definitely in the junior high category. If you ask any 7th or 8th grader what it's like to have absolutely no control over their own destiny, I'll bet every last one of them will relate to slavery.
Well, here's the thing, though, is who's going to relate to that better? It's a kid. A kid doesn't have a whole lot of control over his or her destiny at the point.
Don't know any better.
At that point in their lives, so they don't understand what they're really missing. It doesn't have the impact.
Al?
Well, and that was one of the points I was trying to make in agreement with Joel, is the fact that at 7 and 8, 6, 7, 8, when I describe that to my children, they don't really fully process the impact. They don't. When you get to 7th and 8th grade, yes, they will, but not 6 and 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds. We had a long discussion about our family history and the impact that was affected by them and how it goes. So you do have to build on the information and the knowledge as you go. But yeah, I told both my kids that the U.S. presidents, up until a certain point, some of them owned slaves, and our country was founded on the backs of a lot of slaves. So I don't see how it would be a bad thing to teach that young.
Well, I could see.
But
I can just see I could just see Al doing something like this as a little kid, going, having somebody describe in really broad strokes what slavery is, and then take a look at his young life and go, well, shit, I'm a fucking slave. I can see that happening. I don't get to do what I want.
Parents make me take out the garbage and
Yeah. I have to they make me go to bed at a certain time. They make me get up at a certain time. They make me go to places I don't want to go.
make me go to school. Yeah.
Wow. We need to talk about this. Are kids slaves?
Well,
okay.
I mean, if you
I don't
if
mean
you
to.
think about
Okay,
it,
I shouldn't make a joke out of that. I feel, actually, as soon as I said that, I felt bad. So, there you go.
Well, in a very
think about
objective
it, to
fashion,
some
you're
degree.
right, though. Go ahead.
did I just
ahead,
cut out
go.
again?
No,
Am I still here?
No.
you got
Yeah,
cut off, but we've been doing that all. This whole episode's been like that for some reason.
Yeah, that's all right.
No, go ahead.
If you look at it really objectively, to some degree, you could say that children, to some degree, are slaves. If you really look at it, a lot of them don't have control over what they're allowed to do, where they're allowed to go, and they're dictated to a lot of the time on what's happening.
And in awful scenarios, they're physically dominated too, which you could, and of course that makes me incredibly sad to think about. But
Now let's look at the overarching theme of parenthood. You're trying to teach this person how to be a responsible adult and how to survive in their own household. What these chores look like, what they feel like, how painful they can be, so that they're prepared when they're living on their own. There is significant evidence to suggest that many slave owners, when they either sold their slaves or gave them their own freedom, that they really did see themselves, a lot of these terrible people really did see themselves as parents.
sure, I could see that.
So is there a fuzzy line there somewhere?
I should
There's
be
a
clear.
fuzzy line in
I
everything.
can see them. I can see them thinking that. I can't see that as being true in a.
I could see that from the other side with Stockholm Syndrome. You know what I mean? There are some people, and we see it institutionalization in prisons. It doesn't matter how bad the prison is. After so much time, the mind breaks down. I mean, you see it a lot. You see it a lot in marriages. I mean, the husband just looks fucking miserable the majority of the time.
Jesus. Do we need to have a little session, bro?
Maybe later, not on the show.
Okay, that's probably a good idea.
I'm not comfortable talking about this kind of thing in public.
Just bottle it up, buddy. Shove it down.
Go to my happy place.
I just want to be clear. I don't know Al's wife at all. I'm sure she's a lovely person, and I'm totally joking right now.
And naturally, if you know me from the tone of this show, you know I'm joking completely. I wouldn't want to be hit later.
Today on the 5 o'clock news, a body was found floating in the river. It all stemmed from this podcast.
With cement shoes.
The Cognitive Dismemberment Podcast.
Hey. So I think we're coming to the conclusion that to a certain degree it is okay to whitewash history with certain audiences.
Yeah, but you can't lose sight. I mean, there's got to be sort of a gatekeeper, a chroniclist that values. Yeah, but again, the thing is I as the more I learn about history, the more I realize that term doesn't mean what I thought it used to mean.
What did you think it used to mean?
I thought it used to mean a realistic representation of things that happened in the past, but it's just not the case. Again, like you said, it's through all these different lenses, all these I mean, it's through murdering of whole societies in order to get this particular version. I mean, it's so much more complicated than this is what happened. So much more dynamic.
So go ahead, Al.
One thing I was always taught, my dad tends to be a voice of reason throughout my life. And one thing he taught me really young that stuck with me that I actually remember is that he always used to say, yeah, well, that, never say yes on a first date. And
well, you nailed on that one, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I'm a slut. I can cope. Was that history was always written by the winner. So whenever you hear or read history, remember that the loser's side didn't make the books. So you never hear both sides of a story. And
look at Satan.
No, I would challenge that, actually. I would challenge that. History is written by the survivor, not necessarily by the winner. Because there are several accounts of defeated people who maintained a culture and a history, not necessarily an accurate one, but defeated people who maintained a history. A perfect example comes from the Bible, the Hebrews. It is a history.
I'm inserting crickets there.
Yeah,
Okay.
like the Exodus. A lot of evidence for that.
Right. Well, I was thinking more along the lines of the Babylonian captivity, but another good example would be the Native Americans. You ask a Navajo today, what was your history like? What does your history look like? And they're going to give you a version. They are, let's call a spade, they are the defeated ones. They are the survivors of that genocide.
Let's stop and back up here for a moment. I always get shit about racist crap on this show.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a racist terminology.
What is?
Calling a spade a spade.
God damn it.
Well, you got to
It
go
doesn't
there.
apply in this case, even in the racist term.
If I've got a picture of a card in my head, what the fuck are you talking about? Who's the racist? What's going on here?
I know. Al, you're the racist.
That, by definition, is a racist phrase.
No, it's a card, you jerk.
Call a spade is actually not a racist phrase. Calling a person a spade certainly is, but that's not what he did.
It's a poker phrase, you jerk.
No, it's not.
No, it's a war phrase, like the game war.
Yeah. Anyway, so the point that I'm trying to make is that those narratives do exist. The winners don't always write the history. Very often, the survivors of the losers do stick around and do end up writing something.
Yeah, and I'm definitely not suggesting that, but I can't really account for the outliers in everything that I'm saying here, because there certainly are there. But I guess what I'm saying is that the history that's most known in larger cultures, I think, has those qualities.
Give or take, and again, I'm gonna fall back on the Jews here. Look at the Nazis. I'm not gonna suggest that the Nazis should have won, but what if they did? Would Eli Wiesel's story Night ever have come to light? Probably not. Would Rudolf Hess's story be more prominent?
Well, it's still, in my opinion, a distinction without a difference to a greater extent, because, again, what I'm trying to suggest is not that there aren't different versions that make up history. What I'm suggesting is there clearly were certain events that happened in a certain way for certain reasons, and over time, as we tell history is not necessarily that. In fact, it's usually not that. It's usually not an actual representation of what happened. It's, again, through all these different prisms and cultural differences, and I know those are the same thing for the most part, but
Al,
I guess that's what I'm saying, is history is not what I used to think it was, and I think that a lot of people would tend to agree with that statement.
Sure, yeah. I would, definitely, yeah. Al?
Well, what I was going to call back to is I looked up to call a spade just to verify.
And you got a picture of shovels, right?
No. The phrase predates the use of the word spade as an ethnic slur against African Americans, which was not recorded until 1928. However, in contemporary U.S. society, the idiom is used as a slur.
Among some people.
Like universally? I mean, come on, exactly. Like,
that
of
is
course
from
you
the
can use it in
Oxford-
different ways.
That is from the Oxford English Dictionary.
All right, okay, let me rephrase.
This is dumb.
Let me just rephrase, and I hope that you splice these together, Al, because I'm about to cross over here, okay? Let's just call a dildo, okay?
I like that. We'll go with that.
Jerk.
Hey, I just wanted to point it out that for once I wasn't even in that mindset, and I realize you may have not been intending that, but that's how it comes across. And every time I get called a fucking racist for that type of shit.
It came across that way to one person, you.
It's the one that Joel is using.
I didn't even consider that. Oh, I love you, Al.
Let's you know what? Hey, let's just call a dildo. Joel, go ahead.
God damn it.
Go ahead.
There's your organic or orgasmic segue.
Oh,
Oh, what did I just step in?
So speaking of moral quandaries and dildos,
Uh-oh.
so
Ted
the
Cruz?
next article that was
sorry.
getting brought up was the fight over the first gender-neutral bathroom in the LA Unified School District. John also brought this bad boy up.
Yeah.
Can we describe what the bathroom was? When I think of gender neutral, I guess I think of one of those single unit.
No. It has a sign on it, and it's a multiple stall restroom.
Yep.
And it says gender neutral restroom, and it's got a picture of, I guess half a human body and a wheelchair bound person, and it says this bathroom is for everyone. And
it was, if I read the article correctly, it was installed in a new building in the school, and I'm not going to say what the school was, but it was a new building, a new addition to the school included this bathroom in its floor plan, in its original plan. So this was not a surprise to anyone who was at the schools. It was not a surprise to anyone at the district. It's not a surprise to the architect who put it there. But now it's raising a bunch of shit.
Yeah, it's got a lot of protesters. A lot of them holding yellow banners and signs saying homosex is a sin. Although they've never tried it, I'm sure, so how would they know?
And the article specifies that those people were Westboro Baptist Church folk.
Yep. So, yeah, that's what caused it. It was looks like a high school, and we'll leave it unnamed for purpose of this, but yeah, it was protested by the Westboro Baptist Church.
Hey, I just want to say, I've mentioned this before. I believe it was yes, it was Sam Harris's podcast. He did a full-length, long interview with the daughter of the Westboro Baptist Church's founding pastor. I can't remember his name. Absolutely enthralling interview, because kind of, and this is in the same vein of what we're talking about, getting that perspective of what it was like on the inside and what the narrative was, or is probably like, I suppose to some extent. It really, the way it's described, when she describes these things, you guys are going to kill me for this, but it doesn't sound as crazy as it actually is when you hear this narrative. It's fascinating. Highly recommend looking it up. I wish I had names of the people, but it was a daughter who had, daughter of the lead pastor, who was kicked out of the church or decided to leave the church or something like that. And
Fred Phelps?
Yes, it was Fred Phelps' daughter. And just an absolutely fascinating podcast that I recommend if you really want to understand. If you don't want to understand and you just want to not like them because of what they represent, which I completely understand, by all means continue about your life. But if you want a deeper understanding of why some people might find this line of thinking, this belief system, alluring in some way, it's a really good insight into that.
Yeah, it was an interview with Shirley Phelps, if I remember correctly, his daughter. Shirley Phelps Roper. Yeah, and her brother, I think his name was Fred as well, wasn't it?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
He's been interviewed on multiple other podcasts. He left the church as well. And he's been interviewed by, just about everybody in the secular community. And they give an interesting, they give a very interesting history of how things run in the church.
And it's certainly a cult. I mean, that's what it is by every definition that I'm aware of. So I do have a sense of empathy for the people that are protesting all these things, because I do have a somewhat working knowledge of why they think they're obligated to do this. And I just wanted to point that out as kind of a reference point there. Do want to keep talking about the protesters because they're clearly wrong, clearly misguided.
Well, they're very much Bible literalists, and that's what's intriguing about them.
And it's that Bible literalism that gives them the God-given mandate to order other people around, and that's what I disagree with. I don't perceive that in the Bible. I don't perceive that in Christianity. I don't perceive that anywhere in the lessons of Jesus. There's nothing about Christianity that suggests that you personally should be interpreting what you read in this scripture and forcing other people to do it. No, it's all about personal, it's all about subjective things. You are deciding for yourself what is right and wrong, because what you do is between you and God. Society judges you based on your actions. God judges you based on your intentions and your actions, but your intentions mostly. Anyway, yeah.
I reject most of that statement. However, on a serious note, I do have a bit of a tough time 100% understanding that truly, because this concept that the Bible being the infallible word of God is ultimately left to the reader to decide its meaning. I don't get it.
That's the most horrible way to communicate with a species if you're a deity, in my opinion. But
basically, it's like, here's a bunch of words. Do what you want to do that you think is right. I don't understand how that's a religion.
I'm going to judge you on actions and and your interpretation of these actions. But hey, the interpretations of the actions are going to be based on a book that was written by a bunch of desert people who really didn't know shit about how things worked. But hey, go for it. Seems kind of dumb to me.
I'm not necessarily getting into the truth claims. I'm getting into I'm getting into the conceptual nature of what John is saying, that he has interpreted the Bible in a way that I actually find kind of beautiful in its own way. If I was ever going to appreciate Christianity, it would be a version, as John has so eloquently described many, many times. But it just doesn't line up with, it doesn't on a fundamental level make sense to me because of what it kind of is. That it's supposed to be an omnipotent deity that is saying its words and how you should live, but then to add the context of you have to figure this stuff out for yourself. It just really honestly, it's confusing. I don't quite get it.
Well, that's the nature of free will. It's okay. It's not generally taught in Christianity that people have free will, but it's pretty well a given fact that everyone has free will. So when you bounce the narrative against,
you mean within Christianity, it's a fact?
Oh yeah.
Okay, because I don't think it's a fact philosophically.
Well, okay, we'll get into that another time.
Sure.
The suggestion given by the usual paradigm, beg your pardon, is that sin is a manifestation of free will.
Sure.
That a person is capable of deciding to do evil, so the person is going to choose evil, and that's what sin is. Well, given that people have this gift of free will, it is going to be natural for someone to listen to what someone else says or read what someone else has written down and frame that. That's what the whole framing process is deciding, discerning, judging, if you want to call it that, what these words mean to the person. And of course, every individual has to do that. This is the argument of the Protestants, is that individuals need to be able to do this. Of course, the Roman Catholic doctrine is somewhat different, was somewhat different. It's actually becoming quite liberal these days.
So that's all well and good, but that falls apart at a very critical point. And that's if this deity is all-knowing and has either all-knowing or all-powerful, one of the two. The problem of evil kicks in, but also the fact that if this deity is all-knowing, it could create a situation where there is no evil, and it chooses either not to or doesn't.
It's the Epicurean argument. Yeah.
It very much is. But a deity with all power has the ability to, say, for instance, beam straight into my brain what would convince me that deity exists, and it doesn't.
It would be a violation of your free will.
No, hold on. Problem of evil. Is there evil in heaven?
I don't believe that there is a heaven, but I would suggest that if there is a perfect place, if there is a paradise, then no, of course, there would not be any evil.
Okay. Would there be free will there?
A very distinct possibility. I don't know, but however,
so if the deity
let me qualify that.
No. If the deity has the power to create a place of paradise with free will and no evil, and say that's heaven, it had the ability to do it here and it chose not to.
Well, the qualification there is that the human interaction that's going on, there must be some kind of transformation, because humans are incapable of being perfect, ever, under any circumstance. The human free will commands that we satisfy our human needs. We must eat. We must breathe. By just the act of survival, we are denying those resources from someone else. And in the process of being human, the need for survival is going to cause us to be, at one point or another, in one way or another, and for one reason or another, somewhat greedy, maybe taking a little more than we really need. You know, these are human emotions. These are very human concepts. They can be framed as sin, but they're going to happen anyway. Go ahead.
What happens in a situation of perfect abundance? What is there left that's human at that point?
I'm unaware of any circumstance in human history where true abundance has ever happened.
I'm talking about heaven. I mean,
okay.
Well,
by definition,
you
I think
obviously don't believe in a heaven, so it's kind of a mute argument.
In my personal opinion, heaven is being with God, being on the Creator's side, being, when I die, my soul is absorbed into the God. I don't know what it looks like because I haven't been dead, but I think that there are two polar opposites. You're either with God or you're against God. You're either with God or you're without God, not against God, but without God. So, in my personal opinion, being with God after I'm dead, would be that heaven, would be that perfection, would be that pleasure. Being without God, being without the Creator, without the Genesis factor, if you want to call it that, would be a hell of my own creation, because I have chosen not to bring God with me when I die. That's my personal opinion. It's kind of a boiling down of all of the heaven-hell dichotomies that you've ever heard of. If you take away all of the imagery and you take away all of the revenge and reward fantasies, it boils down to the concept of you're either with God or you're without God. And that's what I've boiled it down to. But anyway,
I mean, with me, above all things, I want my beliefs to be true. Okay. Now,
so does everyone.
So the subjectivity is important here, which is why I don't think it's possible for a concept of heaven, a universal abundance, to exist in any kind of logical sense, because of the subjectivity of our existence. What's good for somebody is not necessarily good for somebody else.
Well, again, remember, we're talking about the afterlife in this particular case. We're talking about you no longer have your body. You no longer have a need for food, water, air, sex. You have no need for those things anymore. Instead, your id exists, your person, your consciousness, whatever you want to call it. Plato would have called it the spirit, but that thing, whatever it is, the common belief is that thing lingers in some way and then moves on.
Well, the position I stand on is similar to Joel's. I want my reality, my viewpoint of reality, to comport as closely to the actual reality as possible. Now, you're making claims about the possibilities of things beyond this world
that I couldn't possibly know about. You're absolutely right.
Or that there's even evidence to support that once you die, there's a soul that even exists.
Nope, there's absolutely no fact, no evidence whatsoever. There is only hope.
So why believe it?
Because I need hope.
Well, you can get hope here. You don't need hope in some existence that may or may not occur.
And I do have hope here. I have hope here for things that have to do with here. But when it comes to the afterlife, I really don't want anything to do with here. I want my afterlife to have to do with things that are more pleasurable than here. Yes,
okay, so
I experience pleasures, but there's always pain involved as well. There's Epicurus right back at you.
Let's play the hypothetical game here. Let's roll with this. Say this deity exists. What if that deity is the malevolent deity that I would report comes from the Bible? It's a malevolent, evil piece of shit. And you die and you go to this malevolent ass. Where's the benefit of trusting or following it?
You laugh, and I don't blame you for laughing, but let me ask you this. What is evil?
Are you asking me, the one who was laughing?
Either.
I wasn't laughing at you, John.
Describe to me evil.
Well, I think that evil is suffering. It's
okay. Evil is suffering.
It's the suffering. Like, the most evil place I can imagine is a place in which all beings are suffering as much as they possibly could. Now, that's not a finite thing, because I don't know how to describe that. But if you can't make any of the beings suffer any more, then that's ultimate evil.
I'm sure if you were to ask an American slave in the 1800s or a Jew in a Nazi camp, they would probably say that suffering is fairly infinite, that there is always something else they can do to make it worse for you.
Again,
so
I'm saying it's that, and then the step beyond that, and the step beyond that, until there is no more steps beyond that, and that is the start of the continuum of evil, because evil is, of course, a continuum.
So, taking this from an Epicurean standpoint, can we make the assertion that evil is discomfort to the individual that is determining whether or not it's evil?
No.
Why?
Well,
because evil
because
is
of empathy.
Subjective. Evil is a very subjective thing.
Of course it is. That's what I'm saying. Okay, so what I'm saying is that every possible sentient being is suffering as much as it possibly can, whatever
In life,
that
absolutely.
whatever that means. Okay, and that's where I start my continuum of evil, and then you move up the continuum with things that are lesser evils until you reach some very gray relative area in which things are good. And one of the things that you mentioned was hope. I would be curious to get your definition of hope, because if you have an existence that is eternal and there's no needs, there's no such thing as a need, why would hope play into that in any way, shape, or form?
Let me address that in a second. Let me go back to evil real quick, because it's important that I stress to you how subjective evil is. I'll give you an example. Andrew Jackson is vilified for the Trail of Tears. And don't make no mistake, that was a pretty shitty move. But because of the Trail of Tears, Florida and the American South were much more, became, in a subjective fashion, more civilized, more industrialized. They became the place that we know today. So the good that we have made out of it came from an evil action. And to the Cherokee, that was a pretty evil thing. But to the white people, the colonists, the settlers, not necessarily white people, there were Mexicans, there were Spaniards, there were blacks, there were all kinds of people living in the area. But the point that I'm trying to make is those lands that they were forced to leave were settled by people, and it was a pretty good deal for them. So that was good for them, but it was bad for the Cherokee.
Yeah, I'm not going to make the point that subjectivity doesn't play a huge role in deciding what's evil, because again, once you're further away from that baseline of the continuum, then subjectivity becomes more and more and more important.
Absolutely.
So, and I totally understand what you're saying. I hear you loud and clear. I'm interested to see where it goes.
Thus Satan, in the biblical narrative, I'm suggesting that is a scapegoat, that is a character that was designed to explain why suffering exists. Because nobody really wants to believe that evil is subjective. But really, when you boil it down and you look at it logically, it is. So in order to explain that in a way that people can accept and not have their entire reality framework shattered, is to create a character, is to create an evil character. This is, of course, the ancients talking. In modern times, we do this as well, but to a lesser degree. We still create enemies. We turn the Russians, the Soviets, we turn them into enemies, even though we were the ones that antagonized them in the first place. Thank you, Woodrow Wilson. We create our own evil.
Well, we create our own characters
good.
of quote-unquote good and morally twist those to suit whatever viewpoint we have.
Sure, absolutely.
So, you
none
just
of these things suggest a God.
So absolutely, and that's exactly where I'm going with this. When you talk to me about a good or a malevolent deity, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, because all I know is the creator. All I know is a deity, and what that deity does is towards some kind of plan, but it may not necessarily be very pleasant for me. But there's
another characteristic you're throwing at. You're claiming to know that this deity has a plan. Not only that it exists, but it has a plan.
I want to believe that it has a plan. I want to believe it has a plan. Well, I mean, I look at human history.
And you want to believe that it exists doesn't mean it does.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, these are subjective topics that we're talking about.
So why even step in and go, you know what, I'm going to accept this when I know I don't have evidence that it exists?
Again, falling back on the afterlife, because I want to believe that there is hope to be had after I'm done with these mortal coils, as Shakespeare so eloquently called the body, the life, the living, the thing that I'm doing right now. When this is done, I really honestly hope that there is more after that for me to experience, and to experience in a more full aspect, not shackled by my senses, not shackled by my body, to be able to experience, as a
That
man,
all sounds good, but I just
as a white man, there is so much about the human factor that I will never know. I'll never know what it's like to be a woman. I'll never know what it's like to be a black man in South Detroit. I'll never know what it's like to be on the moon. But somebody does know what that's like. And I would really like to be able to tap into, I don't know, call it the Akashic Record if you want. I'd like to be able to tap into God, as I would like to call it, and maybe get a taste of what that feels like. That's my hope, is that when I'm dead, my consciousness will be absorbed, go to heaven, do whatever it is that it does. I'm not going to try to suggest one narrative over another, but I hope that my consciousness does something that will allow me to do that, and that's my hope, is to have that infinite pleasure, that lack of pain, that perfection, as Epicurus would call it.
Even though we've pretty well established that consciousness is directly tied to the physical brain.
Is it?
So far as we know,
yeah.
yes.
I mean, as far as we know, this is the only place I'm going to hedge at all. Just because I don't think consciousness is well understood. We don't even have any agreement in philosophy of what consciousness is.
No, but we have a pretty solid basis in science to establish that consciousness.
On the most basic level, if it would be like something,
self-aware consciousness exists only in brains, which is only a materialistic matter.
Well, that's that we can measure. I mean, that's that we could possibly. That's because of our focus, our limited bandwidth of what we can know. But we can't say definitively that a rock doesn't have consciousness.
Do me a favor, Al. One of these days, look up Brain Dead Returns and see how many stories there are of medical doctors who have pronounced people dead, done the scans, seen that their brains were dead, no cranial activity whatsoever, no alpha waves, no beta waves, none of that, no gamma waves, none of that stuff. They are dead. And yet, a few seconds later, a few minutes later, an hour later, whatever, how long it takes, these people are out there. They've been dead.
I know they're out there.
Consciousness was gone.
I see them on the TV. I see them in Congress. I see them in the Senate. I know they're out there.
Those people. It's not lost on me. I got you.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure because that was kind of funny.
I'm pretty sure that somebody who's survived an ordeal like that would disagree with you that the consciousness is directly tied to the physical body.
No. I think it is. I don't think that that's actually an argument against it, and the reason why is because they. Okay, am I to assume that you're saying that during that time that they were, by all accounts, dead, that they came back and had memories? Because our brain, what it does is it fills in blanks all the time.
Brain. Sure, I'll buy that.
And it happens instantly. If you were to add up. So, whenever you move your eyes, whenever you blink whenever you blink, your brain stops processing visual data, and the reason why your brain is still perceiving a fluid environment is because it's constantly creating a model in which it's applying the new data that it does collect. It's not as efficient as we all seem to think it is, like a full-time running camera. It's just this model inside. Reality is just this model inside your head that is being updated very quickly. It's not fluid. It's more like a frame rate than it is, whatever else people seem to think.
Absolutely, but again, you're talking about brain activity. And in situations...
That's where consciousness... I do think that it's likely that's where consciousness comes from.
Sure.
Is from the brain.
You are absolutely suggesting that consciousness is tied directly to the physical brain, to the electrical activity going on in the brain, right?
I do
Because we
think
have no
that,
evidence to point in any
to point
other
otherwise.
direction.
And I agree with Al there. I'm more open-minded to what we might discover. I'm not saying Al's not open-minded about that. Let me rephrase that. But I wanted to relay my open-mindedness to consider that we may have no fucking clue why this happens. Obviously, consciousness comes into existence all of the time through new life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not conscious, and then it is. We don't know. Again, we don't even have a really explanatory definition of consciousness. There's no agreement in philosophy of what it is. In fact, you've got people like Dan Dennett that say consciousness is an illusion. So,
yeah.
And in some ways, I can understand that. There's so many ways in which this could be an entirely illusory thing that is not based in any kind of reality. It's like I don't remember the comedy or comedian that said this, and I think Al will probably be able to tell me. But there's a good chance, it might have been Jim Jeffries, that right now I'm just in a loony bin staring at a wall, just out of my mind on drugs, and imagining all of this as
George Carlin.
Was it George Carlin? Okay. How did I get that?
It was both. George Carlin and Jim Jeffries both had a similar path with that joke. Yeah.
Well, welcome to the Matrix. You should have taken the blue pill.
Well, you want to be in the Borg where everybody knows everybody else's experiences.
No, that's not what I said. I don't want to look into other people's bedrooms. I want to be able to share in those experiences. I don't necessarily want to invade somebody's privacy. I don't particularly care about somebody's privacy. It's not going to make any difference to me after I don't have a body to enjoy it in anyway.
So you're saying you're against an Eiffel Tower, just so we're clear.
I'm just going to let you have your
If there is a God out there, please help us.
I'm just going to let you have your crickets.
Chocolate covered that one was. Oh!
Wow.
Let that sink in a little bit.
Whoa. Hang on. Holy shit.
Whoa, that took a sec. That was a slow starter on that one.
Oh, Jesus. Well done. Thank you.
Oh,
you guys are awful. No, seriously, the notion
came up from behind and pulled that one off. Good job, John.
Okay.
That wasn't even meant to be a pun. I'm sorry, guys.
Wow.
Oh.
I don't believe you. I think you're lying.
No, I really didn't. I didn't think through that one.
Subconsciously, but anyway.
Maybe subconsciously.
Seriously, in my own personal opinion, I really don't think that it's justified to say that God is either good or bad. God just is. I want to believe that there's a plan there because I want to believe in a good God. What I do perceive is that creation does exist. I do find reason to believe that there is some kind of designer behind the universe. And I want to call that, the label that I've slapped on that intelligent designer is God, is the creator. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what it could possibly look like.
But you're presuming a creation. You're using words to backtrack to an idea that you support, as opposed to starting from a point of we don't know how this thing started, but we know that it's here. It's not necessarily a creation. It's a natural event, most likely.
Why wouldn't it be? Every creation is.
You're
sneaking words in there.
But that was a slick move. I don't think anybody would deny. I wouldn't deny that God is neither evil nor good, because I see no reason to think that one exists, of course.
Well,
but the question, I think we're bogged down in this minutia, and I think the question that I find really curious is, truly, would you go about life? Would you truly behave differently if you believed as Al and I do? How would that affect how you make decisions? Would you would you be looser with your choices? Would you be more rigid because of the extremely finite nature of our existence? You know, where does the practicality of spending the time and energy that it takes to think about and consume these ideas of gods, when, I mean, would it really affect how you go about living your life?
When I was in my 20s, I was an atheist, true blue, end all, beat all, end of discussion. I did not want to believe in God at all. I was a very different person.
I don't think that's an atheist, though.
I didn't believe in God. I didn't believe that religion had any verification to it at all, that there was no truth there at all. It was all manufactured to control people. I was in my 20s. I was in my rebellious stage. I did live a very different life. I did pursue pleasures that I probably shouldn't have. I endangered myself in ways that I don't know that I would say regret, because I learned a lot from it, but I could probably have done it differently. I did frame myself very differently, without the notion that I need to be grateful, without the notion of gratitude underlying anything and everything that I do. I had a very different framework for my life. And that's really the lesson that I've taken away from religion here later on in my life. It's not about the rules. It's not about the organization. It's not about the religion. It's about the frame of thought. And that's where I'm coming from at this point. Go ahead.
And I can appreciate that, but what we're doing in that scenario is we're really not comparing likes to each other, because again, you had a different level of life experience at the point that you were doing these things. And I would suggest that a frivolous life that is fraught with risk is actually antithetical to a concept of a finite existence. So I don't think that those things are, that the concept that without a hope at eternal life, that you would then not care as much or be less motivated to do good things. That just seems counter to logic.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I come from, is because from my lack of belief in deities, you know, Odin to Yahweh on the same plane, I don't see any evidence for a deity or gods in any way. I don't believe that I'm going to exist after this existence. My finite existence makes me to be more cautious and more careful on how I treat others, because I don't believe I'm going to have an afterlife. I don't believe I'm going to have, you know, some mythical heaven or mythical hell to look forward to or be afraid of. And I know that because the only thing that I can confirm right now is that I exist right now to a certain point. It's tentative. And with that tentative position, I got to go, well, my model of reality comports currently to this model of reality where I exist and other people exist. And I don't like to suffer. So I don't want to die. I don't want to suffer. So I'm going to do my best to prevent suffering and death of other people as best I can.
Can I just say real quick that what I'm actually trying to get at, and I totally appreciate what you're saying, Al, is that I don't think that there's a correlation between whether or not someone believes in an afterlife and how good they are to themselves or other people. I think there are certainly
I'm not making that
claim. Yeah, there are certainly atheists that behave erratically and irrationally and self-destructively, just like there are with people that do believe in eternal life.
I
don't think those things
for everybody.
Sure.
Just to be clear.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, I guess, really emphasize that point, because I'm not sure our listeners would have picked up on that nuance. Not that they're dumb, both of you that are actually in their podcast now. Okay. But yeah, I just don't think those two things correlate. I think, John, that if you would have remained an atheist, I think you probably would have been on a similar trajectory. It certainly would have been a different experience, and no doubt about that, because it framed up how you chose to view the world. But I think you would agree that there certainly are atheists that live very fulfilling and good lives. They feel good about their existence, as well as there are people that have a genuine feeling of an afterlife that just aren't really that good to themselves because of all other kinds of mechanisms that we can't really talk about. So I just don't think these things correlate that strongly.
And you are voicing, Joel, you are voicing the very same argument that every universalist has ever voiced, that there are good people that, the deity, whatever you want to call it, does appreciate. There are actual Christian church fathers back in the 2nd and 3rd century who suggested that maybe Plato and Socrates were in heaven. It's not out of the Christian question that God appreciates and welcomes pagans or atheists.
You're already sort of begging the question with that, or begging the.
No, I'm approaching the topic.
That.
I'm approaching the topic with a particular frame of mind.
And
Go ahead.
I do appreciate that you came into your viewpoint of religion and or belief in a creator, in your words, that it's giving you a perspective of caring and a very humanistic standpoint, as we've all discussed and seem to agree on. But it still doesn't comport with what we know about reality at this point.
No, absolutely not. And that's kind of part of the point. But
you have a hope for, or you have a belief for. I would really wish that, since you even acknowledge the cognitive dissonance of there is no evidence for a deity, to just go, you know what, that's okay. But, hey, we're all seem to be on the same page, which is great. It's just weird.
Well, here's the very baseline of my argument. The lives that you, Al, and Joel are living, that you have a compassion, you have love for your fellow man, you are good humanists. That speaks to me of a very mature frame of mind, not a selfish frame of mind, not in the Christian terms, a sinful frame of mind. The only thing you lack, the only thing that separates you from Christians in the traditional and the good sense, if you don't mind me saying so, is a belief in God. So in the grand scheme of things, when you ask yourself, who are Christians to say what the Creator does or doesn't appreciate? Who are Jews to say what the Creator does or doesn't appreciate? Well, all they have are their traditions to inform them. And the same goes for humanists.
The difference, though, is in humanism, or from a humanistic standpoint, we don't go, if you don't follow us, you go to hell. And granted, you don't have that concept. You don't support that concept. But you put yourself with Christians, and a lot of Christians do hold that viewpoint, as introduced by the character of Jesus in the Bible, that those that don't follow him go to a place of everlasting torment.
And I'm certain that many of my Christian compatriots would say that that is an accurate statement.
Okay, so right now, I'd like to ask a final question to both of you. We do need to wrap this up. Al, if you can remember the podcast we've just had that was quite lengthy, what was one thing that you learned that you didn't know before you started this podcast?
The Roman history was interesting. That's about it.
I don't know that I can say that I picked up on anything truly new. Reiteration of things that the reiteration of things that I had already thought of and maybe had forgotten. Certainly, the idea of not whitewashing but framing history, especially when it comes to religion. The framework really, really, really defines what the narrative is.
What about you, Joel?
Well, I say that the thing that I learned is even when Al is trying to be more sensitive and point out our racism, he actually is just being a racist himself. So, once again, Al's a racist.
Fucking guy.
Nice.
This fucking guy.
Nice.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. We love you.
Love out.
Bye.
So you think you can break me, but you won't.